Speaker Mark Ferrandino, thank you for joining us for an interview with MatthewsPlace.com. Mark, for those who don't know you, you are the Speaker of the Colorado State House of Representatives and the first openly gay person to serve in that role. You're also a policy and particularly a budget expert, and you are also a new father, and you're reasonably new to the legislature for holding this leadership position. And you're a young man. You were just named by The Advocate magazine to their prestigious annual 40 Under 40 of accomplished young LGBT leaders in the country. So congratulations on that, and thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me. And yes, while you did say I was relatively new to the legislature, this is my sixth session. I only have one session more before I'm thrown out through term limits. So it moves quick in this state given term limits.
Did you, when you came to the legislature, you were an appointee filling a vacancy. Did you intend initially to compete for and try to move up through the ranks of leadership, or did that sort of unfold as things sometimes do in politics?
Yeah, politics, I always say, is about being in the right place at the right time, or sometimes the wrong place. But I actually always wanted to be on the Joint Budget Committee and be chair of the Budget Committee and really work on budget policy issues. As you said, that's kind of my area of expertise and what I'm passionate about. And I was on the Budget Committee for 3 years, and then the minority leader, Sal Pace, when we were in the minority, stepped aside to run for Congress. And I just felt like I was in the right place at the right time to take the step out of the Joint Budget Committee and on to leadership. And so I served as minority leader for a year and then worked really hard to make sure that the Democrats took back the House, and we were able to do that. And I was honored by my colleagues to be selected to lead now the entire chamber.
So one of the things that people around the country may recognize your name from is that Colorado just quite recently passed civil unions legislation, which will take effect on the 1st of May. We here in Colorado know the story behind why we have civil unions and not same-sex marriage, but maybe in a nutshell, to those listeners who don't know our background on this issue, how is it that we arrived at civil unions being the stopping point currently, at least, for LGBT relationships?
Yeah, in Colorado in 2006, there was a ballot initiative to define marriage between one man and one woman. And that did pass, unfortunately, at the ballot box. I opposed it, and a lot of people opposed it. But given that, as a legislature, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And so the only option that was left to us was to be able to go and get civil unions, which provides needed protections for LGBT families throughout the state. And we, some wanted us to wait till we could amend the Constitution. In Colorado, you need 2/3 of the legislature in both chambers and a vote of the people to be able to do that. And we don't have 2/3 of the legislature willing to vote for that. And we'll continue to push for that. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately, but I do think we will probably see within the next 5 to 10 years a petition process to try and change that to ensure that we have full marriage equality. So the fight for civil unions was important, but as Senator Stedman said, it is a huge step, but not the final step towards full equality.
Right, and in the meantime, of course, if a child is 1 or 2 years old right now, they may be well into their teens before all these political questions surrounding the constitutional amendment are resolved. So the civil unions protections have, sort of time value because people's lives are going to proceed in the meantime through relationship changes and parenting issues and inheritances and other important legal issues for families.
Yeah, exactly. And as a new father, we're fostering a daughter and hopefully adopting her soon. I see, firsthand now the importance of those protections for families to make sure that, not just the two people who are the couple, but also any child in that they can make sure that child is protected. So I'm really glad we were able to take this significant step this year.
Agreed. Well, in the meantime, people who know about you know you, I think, largely through a policy or political or newsmaker lens, but Mark Ferrandino, the person, you mentioned you and your partner are fostering to adopt. You also have some life history with bullying yourself personally, and you also have, as a policymaker, some understanding of how educators and government intersect with that issue. Would you mind talking a little bit about your personal experience with bullying and how that informs your work as a policymaker?
Sure. So when I was born, had a learning disability, and so actually I have a twin sister, and both of us went to different elementary schools because at that time only one of the 10 elementary schools in our district, where I was growing up in New York, had special education. And so I went to a different school, literally rode the short bus, and was in self-contained classes, and there was a lot of bullying, especially by students outside of the special ed classes of kids in special ed. It was really, we're talking early 80s, mid 80s, when special ed really was just kind of starting. And so there wasn't the support networks and the understanding from what the consequences are, and by putting kids in self-contained classes, what that did. A lot of that's changed now, thankfully. But, I always talk about a story where I remember when I was riding the bus one day, it was in 5th grade, a kid took my glasses and threw them out the window. And, that was not uncommon to have that type of bullying, especially in elementary and junior high. So I know that firsthand, and both my parents are teachers and educators. And so as a legislator, I've been able to see both from my own experience, what my parents have told me, and then experience from constituents as I've talked to them, that there is an important role that policymakers can play in terms of reducing bullying, creating safe environments, especially within schools. I mean, kids, the most important thing that we need to do as a government and society is make sure that our kids are educated, and they can't be educated unless they feel safe in the environment they're at. And if they're being bullied, picked on, and now especially with cyberbullying, something I didn't have to face when I was a kid, it is something we have to take very seriously, because education is key, and making sure there's a safe environment. So we've passed laws a couple of years ago around bullying. We're continuing to look at it. It's a topic that comes up very frequently at the legislature, and I think policymakers need to make sure we are staying on top of it to try and make sure districts and individual schools have the policies in place to make sure kids have safe environments.
Mm-hmm. Another aspect of institutional diversity that's going on in your world right now is there's reasonably strong LGBT diversity in the Colorado legislature itself, and particularly after the 2012 elections. When you were first, presumably as a much younger man, contemplating running for office, did you feel being gay was going to be an extra complicating factor in trying to have a political career, and how, if so, has your thinking about that changed in light of some of the last few elections, especially here in Colorado?
Yeah, we're sitting in a historic legislative session with 8 LGBT members of the House and Senate, which is 8% because we have 100 members. It's the highest percentage of LGBT members in any legislature in the country. And that is amazing for it to be in Colorado, where just over 20 years ago we passed Amendment 2, which really limited, and got struck down by the courts, but limited the rights of LGBT individuals in our state. When I was interested in politics, and it started from a very young age, as I understood and came to grips with my sexual orientation, it was something that definitely worried me in terms of politics. But as I got more involved in politics, and as I was able to see the changes of our society, I knew it became less of an issue. And so, it was always a concern of mine. And when I first ran, I was worried that it would become an issue. It never became an issue. And, I represent, at that time, West Central Denver, and there was a lot of support, and I was very open and honest about who I was. But now with 8 members, we're seeing members not just from Denver, but from the suburbs of Denver, from Fort Collins, which is really good to see that we are seeing LGBT people be able to be elected from districts across the state.
Right, and now you've got enough diversity of LGBT members of the legislature that any individual one of them is not necessarily thought of as the gay legislator or expected to sort of fill that role, but now there are openly gay legislators who are thought of as experts on family law or experts on the budget, as you are, and so forth, so that I think to some extent it's showing the diversity of the LGBT community and not just the diversity of Colorado citizens themselves. The LGBT people have other interests in their political careers besides LGBT policy issues.
Yeah, when I first started, I made a concerted effort, and I was at the time the only second out LGBT member of the legislature and the first to be openly elected as an openly gay man. And I made a concerted effort not to be running LGBT issues to make sure that wasn't how I was defined. I kept telling people I'm not a gay lawmaker. I'm a lawmaker who happens to be gay. And we've had such great legislators who represent their districts well, who happen to be gay, who are dealing with such complex issues. I mean, if you look at people like Pat Stedman, who's now the chair of the Budget Committee and really has become as an expert on the budget and criminal justice issues, Representative Janal from Fort Collins, who's really delving into health issues, and she has a PhD in pharmacology. Taking all those life experiences and bringing them are really important. But it is also, when we have debates like civil unions, it's important that you have members in the chamber who can say how this impacts our families. And those conversations really change the tenor of the debate on the floor of the House and the Senate, because when members who might not support civil unions have to look at their colleagues in the face and know this directly impacts them and their family and their loved ones, it really makes people sit back and think, do I really want to fight this? While I might not support it, I respect my colleagues and I understand why they're fighting for it. And so we had a great debate on civil unions this year, both in the House and the Senate, I think largely due to the fact that we had a large percentage of LGBT members.
So, maybe in closing, you've mentioned before you were struck as you were college-aged at the time, 15 years ago, when Matthew Shepard was murdered, but you were struck by that case, and it affected your sort of thinking about the position LGBT people occupy in our society, and maybe discuss that a little bit and how things have changed in the last 15 years since then. When that happened, I was in college at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, and I had been involved in politics and really cared about policy issues, but not necessarily LGBT issues. And I had just really fully come out and told people that I was gay. And so when it happened, what shocked me first was how our campus mobilized, and there was a candlelight vigil on campus with hundreds of people who showed up, which, not something you would think would happen so far away. And my campus wasn't, very politically active. It's not something, typical of our university at that time. And so to see that really shocked me, that it had such an impact on people and had an impact on myself. And I realized at that time, while I cared about politics and policy, that I couldn't just care about it from issues that didn't relate to LGBT only. I had to get involved in LGBT issues, and I had to make sure that while I was in politics and policy, part of that fight that I was doing was for LGBT equality and to ensure that things like what happened to Matthew wouldn't happen to other kids or in my community and across the country. Well said. Well, Mark Ferrandino, the Honorable Mark Ferrandino, Speaker of the Colorado House of Representatives, thank you very much for your time today. I know you're busy at the legislature on behalf of all of us who need governing on a daily basis. So thanks a lot for taking time to speak to Matthew's Place, and our best wishes to you in everything you've done on behalf of the community and the public at large. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the work you do for people across this country.